Ladies and gentlemen, what's going on? This is your host, Sunny, and you're tuning in to another episode of It's Always Sunny in the Six. We got another dope episode with you with my homie, JT. And JT, Jagtaran Singh, is currently actually the legal counsel over at the Ontario Human Rights Commission. He's been involved in human rights law for quite some time, and currently his work is right now focused primarily on public interest inquiry into racial profiling and racial discrimination against Black people by the Toronto Police Services. A couple of years ago, we had crossed paths again. He was he was working on Bay Street over at McCarthy, but in fact, we actually met 10 years ago, where he was studying for his law degree over at McGill University, and now is in Montreal. So he's in the studio. We catch up and we talk about his transition from Bay Street to human rights law, and just he's also a Scarborough kid, just like me. Scarborough's his hometown. So we talk a whole lot about Scarborough, the East End, all the wicked restaurants that we have. It's a very casual conversation. Hope you guys enjoy it. Hope you guys take something away from this conversation as we talk a lot about so many interesting topics. And of course, as always, make sure you hit the follow button so you can keep up to date with the podcast. Leave a review. Leave a comment, shoot me a message, follow me on Instagram, and as always, keep moving, and let's just get started. All along with me, and we're waiting for the sunlight, sunlight, for the sunlight, sunlight, for the sunlight, sunlight. Are you still in Parkdale?
Yeah. I'm just, we essentially say Parkdale, but basically it's West Queen West, right on the edge of Parkdale. But Parkdale is an amazing spot, man. Like we really enjoy being here. So. How
long you been in Parkdale now?
Coming up on maybe past 3 years. I don't really remember, but I think 18, 19, 20, 21. Yeah, like around 3 years or so. Yeah, it's done me really well. Parkdale is just a super, super cool spot, man. In terms of a part of Toronto, it's a part that still retains a good deal of culture because of sort of Tibetan immigrants residing in the area, and just sort of, it's an awesome neighborhood that just has everything that you would want and has retained it, at least for the time being. And one of my favorite spots was sort of this bar called Pharmacy, which was this amazing place, which was hyper localized. It was this neighborhood bar that, where the bartender was like, I got this one beer from, my friend who brews these in the garage in Guelph, and he's this Nigerian, Afghani guy, and it's just he's telling me all about it, and he's like, yeah, so I think you might like this, cool. And then he looks out the window and he's like, oh, I think Kyle's having a bit of a mental crisis. I'm gonna go outside and go take care of Kyle. That's really what happened when we were there, and it was really cool. Right. The guy was really, really, really cool, and that's something that's very unique to Parkdale, but also just you live in a space where community has come to mean a lot, and Parkdale is really one of those places where community comes together to try to help out with the wide variety of things that come up in that area, and we really like that. But we'll see. Right now, you're right. Renting works real well. Hopefully, we'll see. Maybe in a little bit, we'll head over to some property management, but we'll see. It's a nuts time in the city, and it's a nuts time with real estate right now. So
yeah, especially with this pandemic, I feel like any area where we're in a lockdown, and there's especially in the downtown core, where it's in the downtown core itself, where a lot of the office buildings predominantly relied on people working from the office. Now you got people cooped up in their condos, working from home. And even when you go outside, I feel like it's you run out of options almost.
You do.
But
yeah,
I'm a big fan of Parkdale. Pretty Ugly is one of my favorite bars. I think I went there with you one time. Me, you, Sabrit, we were on a little a vendor
and
or
maybe
like
Sabrina
a
as well.
bar
Yeah,
vendor.
it's
Yeah.
gone now, man.
Is it?
It's gone. It's gone. It's no longer there. It's one of those sad sort of victims of I think this situation that we find ourselves in. But it's really unfortunate. Pretty Ugly is no longer there. Um, I remember in sort of the mid days of the lockdown when you were allowed to go back to outdoor patios. We started going to the Rhino, and the Rhino was open because it has a huge patio.
Yep.
But like it's really really difficult for a lot of these. They're like independent places. I think the rent in Parkdale and Queen West generally is pretty expensive. Even in Parkdale now, it's starting to go up, I imagine. And like you're seeing a lot of shuttered windows and doors and that kind of thing. And it's really unfortunate. I think like what it means is that growth will happen once things open up again, and hopefully,
Hmm.
governments will be creating plans and incentives for businesses to open up, especially in
Yeah.
places like this. But yeah, it's pretty important. But yeah, a few of those places that Pretty Ugly is no longer there. Mind you, Pretty Ugly was owned by a restaurateur who is doing very well for himself. I think it's Grant Van Garmeren.
What does he own? What else?
He
What other
owns like
restaurants is he?
Bar Isabel. He owns Tennessee
Okay.
Tavern. He used to own Harry's Charbroiled before it shut down. It was also in Parkdale.
Okay.
Which he does as a food truck, I think now, and maybe he has a spot somewhere near like Euclid or something like that in College. He has a bunch of restaurants and he's quite successful. So I'd love to be like that's a small business that shut down. No, I think it's a dude. Restaurants and bars are risky, and at a time like this, he doesn't have outdoor space, and how can you keep a place running when
Yeah, it's
literally
unfortunate, man.
you can't do anything, right?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that, well, we crossed paths, over at Prince Edward County, like
Mm-hmm.
summer of last year, and we wouldn't have imagined that things would go back to what they were March of last year at this time now, right? And imagine, me and myself and you, and we'll talk about your career as well, but, we're fortunate to have the opportunity to work from home,
Yeah,
and have that capability to do that. But
yeah,
I
for
can
sure.
only imagine being a small business owner, being a restaurant owner, and relying on those dine-ins and people coming in, and being as busy as things were, especially Parkdale, Queen West, King West,
Yeah,
not getting a table to now, being only allowed to probably do takeout and still have those fixed costs, for example,
yeah,
at the end of the
yeah,
day.
yeah.
Like how are you supposed to survive? But going back to your comment about the government intervening, it has to happen, man. And
I hope so.
it has to, from an affordable housing point of view, of course, as well, but for more importantly for small businesses and the support that they need, right? So
I certainly hope so. I think there's also a lot of opportunity. It's sort of one of those things that used to be taken as kind of like this given that like economies actually don't run with huge corporations; they run with small businesses. Small businesses make an economy. Is sort of like a very it used to be said quite a lot, and I don't know to what extent. It's been a long time
mhm.
since I've read up on this, but like I don't know to what extent that continues to be the case today. But if that is the case, and I imagine to a certain extent it still continues to be the case that small businesses are very important to any economy. But if that is the case, then I think it's imperative that governments find various methods, whether it's subsidizing or whether it's doing anything else to support small businesses, because they're also awesome. Like if you support small
Yeah.
business, that means that you're going to find growth in various areas. You're going to find new entrepreneurial opportunities. You're going to find like a store selling something you never knew you needed or wanted, right? Like which is really cool, or a service being provided that is something that you wouldn't have thought of beforehand, and it's employing local people, and there's a lot to that, right? Like and I think that that's a really cool way to support your economy. And I know that the model is pretty generally supported in a lot of sort of Scandinavian countries. That's kind of like a very similar sort of economic model that's used, which is to support sort of local businesses and local economies, which is it's quite cool. Like it's good. It's yeah. I love it when people are really proud of and like to represent and support their local communities. And whether that's Scarborough or Toronto or like, you know,
East Side.
yeah, you know it, man.
I do.
Like having grown up
Yeah.
there, like
Yeah.
I love the idea of supporting like a local
Mhm.
economy there, and that's I think it's really cool, and it's starting to happen. It's starting to build up. Like I'm thinking Kingston Road. I grew up very close to Kingston Road. Kingston.
Right. So you're a Scarborough kid too, right?
I'm a Scarborough kid, hard.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. No, I grew up right next
Yeah,
to the
yeah.
Bluffs, basically.
Okay,
South
okay,
south of
awesome.
Kingston, right next to the Bluffs, and like it was just strip malls for days. That was pretty much what it was. And now you see with like I imagine some funding and some there's like business associations, and like you'll see there's some nice things happening on Kingston Road. Like there's some like refurbishing, and like you'll see some nice storefronts being built out and things like that, which are really nice. They all used to be
Whereabouts on Kingston were you? Did you
so
grow up?
like what I'm thinking of is in between like
Like Brimley
you
and
know
Kingston, or
yeah, you could even say like between Brimley going westward toward like right when Kingston and Danforth split off, right?
okay,
Like
okay.
the strip malls in that area were all like they were pretty seedy, right? Like there was a ton of like there was a lot of tattoo parlors, there was a lot of like maybe one or two pizza joints. I remember 2 for 1 pizza was huge. What else? There was just basically there were sort of these old, very old kind of
Mom
like
and pop
spots, mom
fish.
and pop shops, which were kind of like okay, like you'd go there, some maybe one or two restaurants in between or takeout shops, but generally speaking, it was kind of seedy. And now they've started to revamp that and like kind of like create a bit of a culture around that, which is I think is quite nice. But it's also really cool to see like there's like Duckworth's is there. Like Duckworth's was rated by BlogTO as like one of the best fish and chip shops, like because they have one other location on Danforth. God knows like BlogTO forgets about Scarborough all the time, no doubt. Like everybody forgets about Scarborough all the time. It's like the thing to do, but like it's a dope spot. Like Duckworth's is there. There's a whole bunch of other really great spots. A new place moved in near that area called Jatu Jack. It's a Thai place, and it used to be further down on Kingston. It used to be near like I think it was like just past Fallingbrook. Like or maybe it was before. I don't really remember, but it was in an area. Or maybe it was near Warden. It was near Warden in Kingston, I think. Jatu
Yeah.
Jack. Anyway, it's rated one of the best Thai places. Really, really good. And then it
What's it
ended
called
up
again?
moving. It's called
What?
Jatu Jack. Jatu.
Jatu Jat.
Yeah,
Okay.
Jatujak. It's really good.
Okay. I got to
Um,
check it out first.
yeah, for sure. And Scarborough is like the best food in the city. Easily is
Yeah,
found in
yeah.
Scarborough.
So
Anyway, so that's
so
like
I'm
that's moved into the area. It's nice. It's really like revitalizing in a number of ways that area.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see like Scarborough still is like at the as much as when I moved to the city, I miss the city, but coming back to my parents, it's nice to be reminded of, because I'm in the same house that I grew up in.
Yeah. So
So
where,
I'm
where what's your
near.
what's your spot? Like where'd you?
So my area is I'm by McCown and 401,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
near
Cool.
Scarborough
Cool.
Town
Cool.
Center.
Yeah. Yeah. I know.
And so for us, like going back to restaurants, like so Babu's or Roti Hut, which is down the street on Pitfield.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Did you go to
before Preem,
Fredericks?
of course,
Yeah.
yeah, Fredericks. I go to the Scarborough location. I know there's a Markham location,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
the
yeah.
Scarborough
No, but I'm
location
talking about the
has
one that's near Ellesmere.
the OG.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Exactly.
Um,
There's
so
also,
that's
you know what I love from in terms of Hakka, because we talk about Fredericks real quick. There's this place called Lucky's. Shout out to Lucky's.
yep,
Lucky's, at Midland and Lawrence,
yep.
and
Midland.
it's
I've been there.
yeah,
Yeah.
just north of and best chili chicken. There's this article I've been looking it up, and like people are like, oh, there's this place Yatang. I've been to Yatang on Danforth. Or rather not Danforth, Dundas University. I've been there tons of times. They're amazing.
Hmm.
But like people are sleeping on Lucky's, man. Like their chili chicken, amazing. They're really, really good.
Yeah.
Lucky's right there. Like it's a spot, like again, like back to these strip mall areas, right? Like they're pretty amazing.
I think, like, it reminds me of this one episode I did, and we were talking about how, if there's there's going to be a lot of shifts, I think. There's going to be demographic shifts. There's going to be people now kind of dispersing a little bit, moving further and further away. But, these small businesses, restaurants, clothing stores, salons, barbershops, they're like the arteries of our city.
Yeah.
Right. And at the end of the day, like if you can't travel, now more than ever is the time to be a tourist. Explore, like when things open up, explore those smaller restaurants or smaller mom and because they're going to need your business more than ever.
Yeah.
And there's no better way to show homage than to support those local businesses, especially in the area that you live in, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's right. Yeah, for sure. There's a place here in Parkdale called Loga's Kitchen, Tibetan, run by like it does. I'm just gonna come out and say it, best momos in probably Canada. I'm just gonna say that.
That's a pretty bold statement.
Well, I mean, like, come on, like, okay, hold on. I don't know. I as someone who speaks from absolutely zero knowledge and total ignorance of where the Tibetan community lives outside of Toronto, I know that we have a serious Tibetan community in Parkdale. And in that community, I think it has been universally accepted that Loga's Kitchen is the best momos in Parkdale. And if they're the best momos, and there's a lot of momo shops, and they're all amazing. But like, if they're the best in Parkdale, they're probably the best in Toronto. And I don't know anywhere else in Ontario that has a big Tibetan community. So they're probably the best in Canada. In Ontario, at least, if not the rest of Canada. I don't know. I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to do that. But Loga's is
So JT, on that note, like, since we're talking about food, what's your favorite cuisine, hands down? If you had the choice of eating one cuisine, and
Punjabi.
Don't say Indian.
Punjabi.
It's besides Punjabi.
It's hands
I knew you were going to say that.
Oh,
you're right.
I just can't. Like, they're like flavors that I had when I was a kid, and now they are hardwired to like the pleasure centers of my brain. Like when I eat like chole bhature, or I eat like even rajma chawal or something like that, it's just like, oh, this is the best. This is obviously
that was
the best.
That was the best part about moving back home, because I was like, I have a much fuller fridge, because when you're alone and you're living in Toronto, you really only just buy groceries for one person, and you end up throwing half your groceries away because you can never figure out the right proportion of. I know. You end up getting like a stalk of lettuce, and you end up only using half of it.
Who uses that was the most much lettuce? Thing. Like, who does that? Nobody. So when I was living on my own, I love cooking. Like, I really love cooking. And so if I wanted to cook something, I would buy specifically the ingredients to that meal. And I would cook it, and that'd be great.
Right.
But when I was living on my own, I had like Coke Zero, and seltzer water, cheese, and bread in my fridge. That was it. I think, like, largely maybe some onions and garlic for like God knows what I was trying to make. Yeah. But I mean, like, and this is from someone who really enjoys. I love cooking Indian food. I love cooking any other kind of food, like, But that was it. And then when I moved in with my partner, she was like, "Yeah, that's not how I live. So we're gonna have a bunch of food." And I was like, I was shocked when I saw food in my fridge. It was a totally different experience for me. And then, like, moving back home, it must be like fairly similar, being like, wow, my fridge is full of, highly nutritious, good food. And that wasn't something that was, I couldn't.
Yeah. I mean, my bank account looks kind of nice too, because like back then, even though I would do groceries, I would hit 8 p.m. and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to get Uber Eats.
Yep.
And then by the time you end up going to cook the food that you bought, half of it's already gone bad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like a vicious cycle, and you repeat 100%. It again and again.
Yeah.
And so now that I'm back, and I'm like, oh, this is nice. Like, so I ended up getting Uber Eats yesterday.
Yeah.
It was $4.20.
Yeah.
So I was like, screw it.
Naturally.
Got hungry for obvious reasons, and then ended up getting I ordered it from a place nearby in Scarborough, and it was nice. But it was nice. I think the biggest perk of coming back was definitely the food, for sure.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but JT, listen, it's awesome to get you on the podcast, and I want to talk a little bit about your career journey, and working at the Ontario Human Rights Commission. But before, we talk about your career and talk about, because I think that one of the first days we met, you were at McCarthy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be interested in knowing your transition from Bay Street to now,
Yeah.
becoming a public servant and, helping the public and society and whatnot. I want to do a pulse check, man. How you doing? Like, how are you doing at a personal level? Like, we're about, I think, 13 months into this lockdown.
Yeah.
Things don't seem to be getting in. I mean, somewhat better now that vaccines are rolling out, but
Yeah.
it's still like super slow rollout.
Yeah.
Another lockdown. No really clear guidance from the government.
Mm-hmm.
But how are you doing at a personal level? Like, what's going on?
I mean, it's tough, right? Like and I think that's a bit trite. Like it's not easy for anyone, and I think everybody sort of nobody's particularly happy by this. I imagine maybe there's a few folks who are, but I think in in more ways than one, I've been very lucky. Like having my partner living with me as well has been nice. So that means that I'm not lonely. We also, right when I figured the lockdown was happening, I always wanted a dog. Like I always wanted a dog. And I had one growing up as a kid. And then when I started living on my own, I was like, I really want to get this. So I bought a dog like maybe like the first week into when we were like voluntarily working from home.
This is
And
Samosa, right?
this is Samosa. He's a cockapoo. He's a literal teddy bear of a dog.
Yeah,
Like he
he really is.
he's
He
a
really is.
he's
I
a
met him.
human. Yeah, you've met him. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I met him.
We spent some good
Yeah.
times together. He's dope. And so that so I live with my partner and I have Samosa as well. And these are incredibly alleviating sort of elements of sort of my existence in terms of like my mental health. Um, but it's still rough. Like I don't I really enjoy spending time with the people that I do, and I am very exclusive about who I do. And I already mentioned I see my folks, so that means that I limit my outside exposure. Of course, I do with everyone else, but yeah, man, it's not easy. I I but it's not easy, but I think it is a bit easier for me, both because of the things that I described, but also because I am someone who it doesn't take much. Like I'm very okay with being alone, or I'm very okay with being in a situation where I can be sort of like solitary or considering the things before me and just engaging with what's in front of me. And then that's it. And then I move on to the next thing. And like as much as I want to go to work, and I really want to go to work because I really enjoy like the routine of waking up in the morning, you know, going, brushing my teeth, and then getting a coffee, and then like, getting ready, and then like heading out to the TT, like that I didn't love as much, the TTCs.
Awful.
It's rough. It's really rough. But like,
Absolutely awful,
then
yeah.
getting to work, and then like, checking all my emails and doing everything, seeing what's fresh. I love that stuff and I want to head back, but I think generally I've been really lucky and I've been okay. So I don't love it. I respect the fact that we need to do our part and we need to stay at home or isolate as much as possible. But it's not easy, certainly.
Yeah.
Although I do have to accept that, like, it's a lot easier for me than it is for many people.
Yeah.
Because, like, for example, my partner, her parents live in Newfoundland. And
Really? Okay.
yeah, so she doesn't get to, her family lives in Newfoundland, and she doesn't get to see them on a daily basis. She talks to them every day, but she doesn't get to see them regularly at all. And I very luckily get to go see my folks on a weekly basis. So, that helps.
That's awesome.
These are the things that, end up helping a lot. We go for a lot of walks with the dog, which, the dog forces you to leave the apartment, which is really important as well. And you get to see what's happening and what's what, right? Like, and that's helpful. But, and, like I said, Parkdale's an incredibly lively place to be. So, one thing or another, you're ending up like going for a walk and having a good time being out in Parkdale, but it's not easy. I'm okay. I'm healthy and I'm happy. Not overly happy. I could be happier, but then
Yeah.
I imagine who couldn't be, right? Like,
Yeah.
but
That's good, man.
I appreciate my conditions and
Yeah,
going
that's
from.
good, man. I think I personally share the same sentiment.
Yeah. What about you? How are
Um,
things going with you? I know you
yeah,
moved
you know,
home
things.
recently, right? So like, what,
Yeah.
like, how, like, is it easy living with your folks again, or like, and your family and your like siblings as well, or like?
So, I mean, it has its pros and cons. I think, I share the same sentiment when I was in the city that, the ability to go out and about, even if it was just for a walk or a run, there's just so much happening in the city. Like there's so much lively, like, you never know who you bump into or what you see. There's always action, right?
Yeah.
I think coming back to the East End, it's a lot more quieter. In the
Hmm.
suburbs, you ain't not when I go for my walks and I go for my runs, it's literally the same shit
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
every single day. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
miss I miss that part. But I mean, moving back to my parents was a bit of an adjustment because I had to set up the new studio.
Hmm.
And so I did that in the basement. Then I thought about it and I'm like, well, I don't want to do anything until my parents get vaccinated. I wanted to make sure that if I'm having people over, I want to, at the very least, my parents should be vaccinated.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, okay, I'm being a little bit careless. I need to maybe take a step back and wait for them to get like both doses or
Yeah.
everyone at least get the first dose, right?
Totally.
At the very least. So even though I have like a separate entrance to the back,
Yeah.
I kind of waited a little bit, and that's
Yeah.
part of the reason why I took almost a six week break.
Yeah.
So moving back to my parents was a big thing, and then um, what's annoying is I set up my mics and everything downstairs,
Yeah.
and for some fucking reason, there's like a radio frequency interference,
Oh, really?
and in that room only. So I spent all this time putting up my brick wallpaper, getting my couches and everything, and for some reason, like there's no RFI here in my bedroom,
Yeah.
but in that room there is. So I need to figure that out once I start getting my guests to come into the
Yeah.
studio.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, other than that, man, things have been good. I'm trying to get back into the routine. Been working out every day.
That's it, right? Like, I mean, like, I honestly, I think I've been working out probably more regularly now than I had been before, right? Like, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
one of those weird things where, I mean, if I didn't, I'd go nuts. But like, also, I'm at home. I don't walk around as much. I don't get the daily like steps. I don't do nearly the things that I, like we've, and it's largely my partner Avi's doing, but like, you know, we do things like deliver food on something for with an organization called the Bike Brigade. Shout out Bike Brigade. Like they're an organization. It's run by a lawyer. I think his name is Dave Shelna, but he runs something called the Bike Brigade, and he's sort of known as the biking lawyer. He does a lot of cases related to biking, but and many other things. But basically, you deliver food to folks who just need it, and you bike places and you just deliver it in your backpack, or if you have the ability, you deliver it in a trailer, and you just bike places and deliver your food, and then you move on, and it's pretty awesome. It's really
it's
really nice.
amazing.
The other big thing that we've started to do is like whenever we see if there's a possibility, we try to put some stuff, some food in community fridges. And now
Okay.
uh, we recently signed up for cleaning fridges as well, and as a part of the community rotation of things that
That's
we do. And
awesome,
so
man. That's
initially I was kind of like, really, like it's it seems there's something weird about the fact that, like, people who belong to marginalized communities are engaging in work, um, like real, like this is elbow grease work to
yeah,
help
yeah.
other marginalized communities. Like, it really seems like society probably ought to have come up with something better for this. Like,
Right,
we
right.
probably shouldn't need a community fridge, let alone need someone to clean the community fridge on a weekly basis. And I was initially kind of like, that's like, it's wild. But then I mean, like, why would I not take part in that too? So, it
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
Like, if she's doing it, and if it's necessary, and if I'm here and I have the ability, why would I not do it as
Hmm.
well? Right? And
Absolutely.
it's very like, you and I don't know your level of adherence, but like, we're both sick, and
Hmm.
it's a very critical part of seva, like, is if
Hmm.
you can do something like this, if you can offer your abilities to do something similar, why would you not do it? Which is a big part of like, me doing what I do for a living as well. But like, it's that element of like, sort of like, yeah, this is your local community seva. If you're not going to the Gurdwara and giving your daswand, which honestly, often give my daswand to other organizations where I see things are happening. Um, if I can do that, then why not do it? And if I don't have an opportunity to do that, why not do it myself? And I think that there are opportunities here at a grassroots level to do that sort of thing. And I think like as Sikhs, we should probably take a great deal of action and we should take a great deal of direction from the fact that like we literally are founded on a socially revolutionary philosophy. Why wouldn't we help those around us at all
Yeah.
times?
If you actually Google who are the bravest communities in the world, like
Yeah.
right now,
Yeah.
for anybody that's listening right now, the Sikh community will show up. And a big part of that is, this idea of, or not this idea, but this strong value system of doing seva, of giving back to the community. I think it's critical, man. And I agree with you, JT. Like for the people, I don't even think this is something that just for Sikhs, but everybody, I think it's so important to give back and be involved in community because, a couple winters ago, I'm sure you know this as well, but I started Bundle Up
I
Toronto.
remember that.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it was an opportunity for me to give back to, the homeless in Toronto
That's right.
and that are in the shelter system that don't have access like we do and the luxury that we do to have options when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
wearing what color sweaters, what winter jacket I'm
Mm-hmm.
wearing today and whatnot. So,
Yeah.
I had that idea as I was walking home and I was going to my condo and I saw a homeless person and I was like, I was complaining to myself. I
Yeah.
was like, damn, it's so cold today.
Yeah.
And I was wearing a jacket and I
Yeah.
just got out of the path
Yeah.
and I saw this person and I came back and it hit me. I'm like, you know what? I want to do something.
Yeah.
Came up with the name Bundle Up TO and it became, I started with my network of friends and then eventually it turned into it was a winter donation program
Yeah.
and my company got involved and then a couple other companies got involved and I think we earn money, that's fine, but there's a different level of currency and fulfillment that you get when you help others,
For sure.
right? I think that everyone wants to help, but there's a convenience factor, right? We're so
Yeah.
caught up being busy and swamped day to day that it's like, how can I contribute and do my seva without having to, let's say, go outside and do all of that? So I wanted to, this was a platform
Yeah.
for people to give back. And all it really took was just to go into your closet and do a couple, an early spring cleaning
That's it.
and
Yeah.
donate.
Yeah.
And, man, we raised almost close to about 145 jackets the first winter.
Yeah. I remember.
And since
This was a
then,
very successful project. I remember reading about it. Yeah.
yeah, it's been happening every year.
Yeah.
And, COVID kind of, so unfortunately this past winter,
Mm-hmm.
just like everything else, it took a pause because there was nuances to it. There was like, okay, well, we can't accept used clothing anymore. It has to be dry cleaned and all of that stuff. So, we're hoping to bring it back this year.
That's good.
And yeah, so you know what? I think, it's a good segue. Right now you are currently legal counsel for the Ontario Human Rights Commission.
Mm-hmm.
You were in the private sector,
Yeah.
Bay Street, and I assume this idea of seva and giving back was a big reason that propelled you from the private sector to the public sector. Talk to me a little bit about that, man. Talk to me a little bit about yourself. You have a stacked resume. You got your law degree from McGill, and then you went to Columbia Law School as well.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about that,
Sure,
your journey
sure.
and whatnot. So.
Yeah. No, I'd be happy to. Yeah. I mean, so growing up, it was always a thing. Like with my family, it was always a very big deal to. It wasn't good enough to just be something. It was, what are you going to offer back to your community? And that was always the central theme of everything we did. So, me wanting to go to law school was fine. It was okay. It was. I mean, I'm no doctor, right? So I'm not in the upper echelons, but I'm like in between. I'm all right. For a brown family.
I mean, you're better than all right. You're better than all right.
I mean,
but
like,
when did you know you wanted to go to law school? Like, when did
pretty
you...
early on. Yeah, it
Okay.
was pretty early on. Honestly, it was and this sounds really cliche, but it was the OJ trial, man.
Was it?
It
Okay.
was OJ. It was basically, we watched it. It meant a lot. I'm pretty sure in third grade or something similar. And but the way that my folks described it to me was, look at this guy, Johnny Cochran. He's a black man, and we know how black people have been treated throughout history in the States. And he's a black man, and he's one of the best, if not the best, lawyer in the United States.
Hmm.
And look at him defend this and for people's rights. Subjects being who they are, right? Like, it was OJ, and we can talk for a while about whether or not he's guilty or
Yeah.
not. But like,
Well,
the idea being though that like, Johnny Cochran was this guy who represented a lot to his community, and he was considered one of the best lawyers, and he fought for rights, and this was what he did. And he was considered top tier. And there was nobody who was going to look at Johnny Cochran and say, you're not smart, you're not worth talking to, you're not someone whose opinion we should consider, because he was a very good lawyer. And so that was sort of put to me early on, and I sort of thought about it a fair bit, and I decided, it sort of cultivated a bit of an appreciation for what he did. And
can we acknowledge for a second
yeah,
that in third grade, I was probably unfortunately still watching Barney or Power Rangers at that age. My man was watching the OJ
yeah,
trial.
yeah,
Good for you.
yeah. No, it was big, man. It was big in our house. We used
Yeah.
to come home from school, and I remember it was on. We weren't allowed to touch the dial. Like, you know, I wouldn't put too much into it in terms of my own abilities. It was more because my parents were like, "You're not changing the channel," and we only had one TV, so I was sort of forced to watch this, and I got into it. But like, all things in, it was bit of a seminal moment for me, and I got very into this idea of being a lawyer, not knowing really what it entailed. I learned more later on, and eventually I realized that everything we do everything we do is governed by laws, obviously, and to a certain extent, we, while we know ourselves to be free in a certain way, everything we do is still limited by the laws and the boxes that we live in. And it was interesting to me to know, what power, what authority allowed us to do that, and why, right? Like, why do we adhere to that, and well, what's the purpose? So, I went to law school. I went to McGill. It was a great time. Not many. Law
That
school
was
is
the
a
first
tough
time. That
time.
was the first time you
That
met
was the
when you were
first
at
time we
McGill.
met. That's right.
I,
Yeah, we had a time. We had a time.
this
It was a
that
good time.
that was that was 10 years ago. I
I
think at
know.
least.
I know. I was
Yeah.
thinking about that the other day. It was 10 years. But it was a good time, man. Like,
Hmm.
law school is rough for a lot of people, and it's largely because A, it's not often a great space for people, for minorities, and B, there's a lot of weird m- mental pressure that they put on law students. And I say they sort of vaguely, but like, students put it on themselves. Culture or in law school puts it on you. But like, in law school, people tend to think like it's this or nothing. If I can't make it here, what do I do? And they put a ton of pressure on themselves, and it's a bit of a rough spot mentally for a lot of students. And luckily for me, and that's so a lot of people hate law school. Luckily for me, I met some good friends. I found myself in a good space, and I was okay. I really enjoyed law school at McGill. I think McGill's amazing. I had some great professors, one of whom is now the dean, Robert Leckie, and um, like, I had a great time in law school. I'm sure big part of it was you guys coming through and visiting and
That
crashing for a
was
little
that
bit. That
was
was that
that
was a
was
good
a that
time.
was a pretty wild week.
it was it
That
was wild.
yeah, that was a pretty fun. It's crazy to see how fast time flies because I
Yeah,
remember when we met in Montreal, you were telling us that you were here for school.
yeah.
Me and Sabri weren't that close.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And so we got a little bit close. Actually, like we got more closer, I think, after that trip.
Sure. Yeah,
He had invited me. He's like, "Hey, we're going to Montreal for this road trip.
yeah,
I'm going with Sunny Baya, a couple of friends from
yeah. I remember that.
UTM,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I had just started working at RBC Dominion Securities while I was still
Mm,
in school.
yeah,
And I'm like, why the fuck not? Let's
yeah.
do it. and
Yeah, yeah.
we had some pretty good times, man.
Yeah, no, I remember that was a great time. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just thinking about my apartment and like, having that many people there for a while and then going and visiting other people we knew in Montreal. Like it was a good time. It was a really good time.
It's crazy to think about, like, I feel so bad for people like, now or today that are in school,
Yeah,
because these are taking 2 years away from,
I know.
you know such a big part of your life. Like for me, university was huge. I bet, even like going to law school being an extension of university, and
Yeah, yeah,
a big part of that wasn't just learning, but it was building and fostering those
for
friendships,
sure.
that network. It's huge,
Yeah,
right? Going in,
yeah. No,
and I'm sure it influenced your career too, right?
yeah,
To a
no.
large extent.
The idea of now having to like go to school remotely is brutal. Like I can't imagine what it's like, that full year being taken away. I mean, think about kids in high school, like the best. I used to think for a long time, I thought high school was the best years of my life. Like I loved high school. Then I got to undergrad and it was okay. It was pretty good. I didn't hate it, didn't love it. Like it was great. I met some good friends. I was ready to move on to law school. And once I got to law school, I had a great time. But the stuff that I was most interested in at the time was sort of all the practical stuff, like how quickly can I start defending people? How quickly can I start making a case? And so I joined the McGill Legal Information Clinic, or rather the Legal Information Clinic at McGill. And I joined as a part of this student advocacy program where, like, students who would have various sort of like, I'm not going to say charges against them, but they would be accused of various sort of things that they did. Whether there's a real culture of protest in Montreal, so there were various things that students did, and a lot of it was cheating, a lot of it was plagiarism. But we would go there and prevent our best at the robust defense, and we got a lot of students sort of like, we made it clear that actually, the machine actually made a mistake when they thought that we were copying. They just scanned it wrong. They scanned the paper wrong for the exam, or like,
Interesting.
whatever else may happen. And like where there wasn't a case that worked so well, we would try to negotiate what would happen to the student. So that was really cool. We had a really great time with that, and I was a part of some other boards, and I mean, like it was great. I knew at that point that I still wanted to do human rights work and I wanted to do community based work, but there's a lot of competitiveness in law school. And when the hiring stuff happened, there's like a thing called OCIs and on campus interviews. And when that took place, it was like, it was the thing. Can you get a job at one of the top firms? I was going to go back to Toronto. So for me, it was just sort of, can you get a job at one of the top firms in Toronto? And for me, it was litigation. And when that happened, it was like, yeah, I can do it. Like, what are you talking about? Like, shut up. Like, I can do it. Like, and you sort of like take it as a challenge, and you go there and you do it because you think it's really cool. And you think like, this is the best possible job I can get, like, in the country. And you go, and, maybe others had different experiences, but this was what this is what I came to know. And many people have criticisms of law schools because they feel like they funnel too many students into private firms. But I went and I did it, and I ended up choosing McCarthy's. I was lucky enough to get, like an in firm interview with McCarthy's, which is a big national firm, and a few other firms. And I got offers from two firms, and I ended up choosing McCarthy's. And like, it was a great, like, they really are pro litigation, pro, like, all that. They're very strong in what they do. They're very detail oriented, very good, very qualified. Um, but it's big law, and big law tends to have a particular culture, which, I think people who work in big law would acknowledge can end up being quite toxic. It wasn't anything that was particular to McCarthy's. Um, it was just sort of the general atmosphere in the area, and like in on Bay Street in general. And like, as a guy with a turban, I would be looking around and I'd be thinking, like, I don't know if this partner actually wants to talk to me. I don't know if they feel comfortable around me. And like, I can, when I'm with my friends from Scarborough, I'm chill and I'm talking like, we're like we would in Scarborough. But like, if I'm in a professional environment, I can put on that face too. Like, there's a lot of code switching that goes on, but I'm very good at that. I'm very able to put that on, and it's not difficult for me. But in the end, you realize that it's easier for folks to work with, and perhaps problematically, but it is easier for people to work with people that they're comfortable with. And, a lot of these old partners were very comfortable with working with a particular kind of person, who would be able to talk to them and relate with them in ways being like, oh yeah, my dad was at the golf course the other day, or my, this is what happened, or that, like, and they're like, oh yeah, great, I can connect with this usually white dude. But and I reiterate, this is not something that's unique to McCarthy's. Like, McCarthy's generally, I, as I'm sure with a bunch of people, minorities, did come up against discriminatory issues and things like that I dealt with in the ways that we all deal with these sorts of things. But it wasn't too difficult for me, like, to be honest. The main impetus for me wanting to leave was because I knew that commercial litigation wasn't really what I wanted to do from the very beginning. And once I started to do it, and I was like, okay, cool, we're going to be making these arguments related to contracts and relating to good faith and relating to these sorts of things, I was sort of like thinking to myself, to help who, like, who is this for? And it's for a large corporation, corporation A, B, C, D, or E. And I just didn't care. And for all I know, it probably reflected itself in my work. I don't know, right? But like, at some point I realized immediately that I needed to leave, and I had always wanted to do a master's in law. So I started to apply for that basically after a few years.
So I I want to kind of touch base on that point that you brought up. So I work on Bay Street as well, and I've been there almost my entire career after graduating, and I think that's a really big point. Being a minority, I see that there's certain conversations that you have and you can't really relate because our history is a little bit different.
Yeah.
Our struggle growing up, like I grew up in Scarborough, I had a turban and gurti for up until grade 7.
Yeah.
I went through that discrimination,
Yep.
and it was a big part of the reason why I did cut my hair.
Yeah.
Right. And, I think that toxicity is something that I feel like a lot of people can relate with.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a person of color.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think it's the next generation that's going to change that. It's going to shift that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think changes are coming. I think, though, that, like, I think a big part of, I know that there's a lot of opportunity to criticize those that sort of like were before us by saying, why didn't you fight for this, and why didn't you do this, and why didn't you, but like, and some of those criticisms are probably quite legitimate. Like, for example, trying to say, like, the way that we make it in society is by, we have the right to be at the top of this corporation or at the top of that, like, fighting for the ability to be recognized as, being able to be at the top of a corporation. But like, maybe it's saying, guys, maybe we need to change the system a little bit. And, we don't look for legitimacy from corporations and people who run businesses at that level, but maybe we start to do our work within our community, and we start to build things at our own level, and we start to help people, and we start to grow from there. That criticism could be offered, but at the same time, man, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, and like, they did their best, and we're doing our best. And the people who come after us, are going to be doing their best, and they're going to be working off of what we did as well. And, I really appreciate what was done. I think it was great. I don't have any desire to be a partner at a large law firm. I don't have any desire to be the CEO of a Fortune 500. It's not something that I care deeply about. What I care about is sort of the human rights work that I now do. And like, I think that the toxicity that we dealt with at that time, even while growing up, but then like, working in places like this, is just something that we had to do and I think, hopefully, God willing, things are better for the folks, young kids who look like us who are working in those spaces now. I don't imagine they're going to be that much better, because the nature of, I think, like, the system is such that it breeds this sense of toxicity, right? Like, it breeds it, whether or not you belong to a particular minority group. Like, if you're working at a law firm, they're built like pyramids. You have a ton of associates and you have very few partners, right? Like, that's how it's meant to go. It's a pyramid. So your time is limited, or you have to really, really work to get, like, in a very particular way to get to the partnership level, if that's what you want. right?
That's absolutely true.
And
I think that's like, we talk about that deep rootedness.
yeah,
It's systemic in so many ways. And, like, for example, racism, we talk about racism, and that's a general term, but there's systemic racism that is that's deeply rooted into the
for
systems,
sure.
into, I think, and we can talk about that as well. Like, the George Floyd's case, for example, this week,
Yeah, yeah.
there's some good news to see that there was justice being served,
Hmm.
but I feel like there's still a lot to do. There's so much more to do, and I think, seeing you, JT, I didn't know about this until I read about it, but you're focusing now at the Ontario Human Rights Commission more on the public inquiry, with the relationship between people of color, Black people particularly,
Hmm.
and the Toronto Police Services.
Yeah.
How long have you been doing that for? Like, what?
So when I started working at the commission, I was lucky enough to like sort of have the ability to engage with this work early on. So I'm coming up on 3 years at the OHRC. But I'll just say to the George Floyd thing, like uh, Malcolm X, I think it was Malcolm X who said something along the lines of, if you stab me 9 inches and the blade goes into my body 9 inches, and then you take it out 6 inches, you've not done anything for me. I shouldn't have to like thank you for that. You've not done me any favors, right? Like it's still in my body. You still stabbed me. The blade's still in my body, and you've taken it out 6 inches. What's the big deal, really? Right? Like, and I found the Floyd verdict to be pretty anticlimactic. It was, I suppose it was bound to happen at some point, and it's worth acknowledging, and in fact being somewhat, okay with the fact that it happened, and like we got a verdict that we're somewhat pleased with. But realistically speaking, like there is so much going wrong. Like there's so much that's problematic about, you know, the state, and in particular the police's interaction with Black people, with Indigenous people, with other racialized people. And a lot of that work, luckily, I've been able to engage in. And that was the work that I wanted to do. So, like, after I left McCarthy's, I went to Columbia and I did everything from, you know, law and poverty to, national security and law to, and I learned a lot about financial related issues at McCarthy. So I also did a lot of stuff related to the Panama Papers and tax havens. And, I ended up, working for the, like, consulting for the Mauritius government financial services commission on, like, their tax haven status and that sort of thing. So, like, I was able to engage in all of that work, and it all sort of informed, certainly all of that informed the work that I do now, because it provided a perspective and provided me with sort of like an understanding of not just the specific work that I was working on, but also how the world reacts to various issues that are taking place at a global level. And all of that sort of informs the work that you do, right? So I would like the work I started about 3 years ago. Initially, as an advisor to the chief commissioner, I worked on a whole bunch of different files, and one of them was this file with anti-Black racism and racial discrimination faced by Black people by the Toronto Police. And now it's the work now that I'm working as legal counsel. I focus heavily on this file. Like this is one of my main areas of work. In fact,
So
most of
what
my
does that
work
look
is
like?
with that.
So what does that look like? I mean, I feel like, in the news we see it all the time, and
Yeah.
especially after last year's protests that happened in Toronto and everywhere worldwide after George Floyd's death, the relationship between the police and the police state, particularly, or the community, with marginalized communities, has always been very, brittle, right? And it hasn't been like the greatest, right? And I
Yeah.
think there's areas of improvement, a lot of improvement, but there's really deep rooted issues. What, like, in your experience and in your opinion, how do you see that changing? Has it been changing? How do you see that? How can we find a resolve? Because, like you said, like, for example, with this case,
Yeah.
like the result that came out of George Floyd's case, like, it was anticlimactic. I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
because it's like, what's next,
Yeah. I
right?
mean,
Because
like, if there has been any progress, it's been because of
hmm
grassroots work. It's been kind of
hmm
like it's been because of BLM, Black Lives Matter. It's been because people have been protesting this every day for like a whole summer, and before that, for many years before that. Like, this hasn't been because one day our institutions woke up and said, "Hey, this is wrong. We should probably take care of this community." It was because people fought and died every day, suffered, went to jail. Families suffered specifically because they were protesting this very issue. And it's a marginal win when you think about it, right? Like, it's sort of an acknowledgement that, oh, okay, so we can finally get a jury to convict a guy who put his knee on a guy's throat for 9 minutes.
for 9 minutes. Yeah.
Oh, 9+ minutes. Like, it was pretty obvious to most of us that that was a problem. And we got the jury, and it happened, and that's good, and it'll probably be appealed. But like, realistically speaking, if there is any progress that's been made, it's been made because people have been fighting tooth and nail for this, and that's in the States, and it's in Canada. And like, there's a it's hard for communities to change. It's hard for people to understand why there are calls to defund the police and what defunding means. And I think people think, defunding, like, what does that mean? Like, if you take away the police, then who's going to help me when I'm in trouble and somebody's trying to attack me? And there are various conceptions of this, and there are various other alternatives. But like, you know so much of police resources, and so much of that, that engagement that the police has with the communities actually has to deal with issues that don't necessarily need police. They maybe need mental health experts. Maybe they need
Exactly.
someone else, right? Like, maybe, and because of that, we've sort of thrown that all on police forces, and many police forces will recognize that they're not trained to deal with mental health issues, and they're not trained to deal with them in the way that perhaps we would want them to, and they're put in these situations. So wouldn't it make sense then to make sure that we have the right people for the right jobs at the right time? And that's what defunding the police really means. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have nothing and there's going to be lawlessness in the state. And that's sort of like a weird sort of limbo that we all live in, because there's a group of us who don't really understand what that means, and there's a group of us who are saying our very survival depends. I say group of us, Black people, are saying our very survival depends on dismantling the police force, and
The
that's
police
what
force.
that's what that means there, right? Like,
hmm I think it's a big point because I remember last year, or even this year, like defund the police was a big movement,
yeah,
and I think there needs to be a clear understanding of what that means.
yeah,
It doesn't mean to get rid of the police completely. You're absolutely right. You know, there needs to be a reallocation of funds and additional resources to get professionals that are trained and educated in the field of mental health, let's say,
mm-hmm.
or provide that level of training to police, or make that should be a requirement, let's say,
Yeah,
if that you're going to be a police officer, that you need to take certain courses or certain programs that deal with the psychology of an individual. Because being in the city, and even through this pandemic, I remember once I was on my bike and I was going up Yonge Street, and I saw an individual, and you could clearly tell that they were agitated and upset, and they weren't fully there.
mm-hmm.
There was a mental health component, a really big one.
Yeah,
They were screaming, and cops showed up, and it was early Sunday morning, and cops, at least four cruisers had showed up, surrounded this person, and I continued riding my bike, but I
yeah,
can only imagine what would they do in that situation?
yeah,
How would you de-escalate, that situation?
yeah,
And especially when, your entire, I can only imagine, day in and day out, that's kind of the stuff that they deal with around the clock.
yeah.
It's huge. And I think that's something that, we need to have an understanding for, and the government needs to also appreciate and do something about it to make that change.
Yeah, no, I think that that's pretty important, and I think, you know, the argument that's made for defunding, and you can take it with a grain of salt, or you can understand it how you like, but the argument that's made for defunding and in fact dismantling the police is that, look, there's a lot of, I mean, like, look, there are popular culture, even TV shows that are made around this notion of police culture, right? About how you like sort of never cross another officer, and like, there's this idea of like, the blue line, right? Like you never cross the blue line, that kind of thing. And if you have such an ingrained culture in the institution that is meant to be protecting you, but it also has the legitimate monopoly on the use of force within a society, um, there's only one way. The argument is that there's only one way to sort of engage with that in a way that will sort of remove the negative elements, and that is to dismantle it, get rid of it, and reconceptualize something which will engage with the security of people. And a lot of people will say, like, look, instead of dealing with the negative consequences of things that are happening, why don't we proactively deal with it? Use that money to spend it on social programs to make sure that kids are not like, in these areas where that leads them to crime or these various issues. And like, that it's a way of thinking that certainly needs to be acknowledged, thought of, and studied a lot more. But I mean, like, you just can't deny a group of people who are saying our very survival in this society depends on the fact that this force that has the legitimate use of force in society be defunded or to some extent severely curbed, because without that we're not going to be able to survive or thrive or grow in the way that we need to. I mean, it's a real thing. It's not like sort of like, I think sometimes people just say, oh, we all have it hard, man. We don't all have it hard, right? Like, it's just the natural truth that we don't. Like, there are people that are treated worse than everyone else, and Black people are. Racialized people like you and I are also treated not the same, but we're not the same as sort of Black people and Indigenous people, and that's just a reality of it, especially considering the racism that our own community has towards Black people,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
like it's intense.
It's huge, and I think that's where, like, we can all do our part to tackle systemic racism, and I think it also starts with conversations at home.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, for example, like our community goes through racism as well,
Hmm.
and I think you don't want to be someone that is honing a level of ignorance by not understanding the fact that there's diversity. It does exist, but it needs to really happen that in the conversations at home, particularly
Yeah,
because people like me and you, for example, like we're born here, we've been through school. I was the only Punjabi kid growing up.
yeah, yeah,
Half my friends were Black, and so I really was a part of that growing up as a kid. But I think I can only imagine our parents who, like, for example, as soon as they landed in Canada,
yeah,
up to today, they're still working, and from 9 to 5 or nine
yeah.
to whatever,
It's
they're
nuts. Yeah.
they're working, and then they come back, right? And I think, yeah, I
You know
think there's
what's
a
wild? Like, I heard it was years ago that I remember my dad was telling me. He's like, man, like when we first moved to Oakville and we, like, I was born in Denmark. My sister was born in Denmark. My parents live in Denmark for many, 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 many years. They speak Danish.
okay.
And so when we moved to Canada, they were like, okay, we're moving in, and like friends of theirs were agents, and they ended up moving to Oakville. I don't know why, but like they ended up moving to Oakville. My dad was like, man, I used to walk down the street and people in pickup trucks used to basically just say stuff to me, and like used to like yell racial epithets and like just used to say stuff to me that was like nuts. And like, and he's like, my reaction was to run after the guy, just sort of yelling something at me while I'm walking on the sidewalk. And he's like, that was the kind of stuff that I grew when I came to this country. That was what I was dealing with, right? Like, working 9 to 5 is one thing as well. And in addition to that, having to deal with that level of like sort of racial vitriol is like, I've never, like, look, there's not been a year in my life that I haven't faced racism, not a year, like, or discrimination, not probably, like, COVID doesn't count because I'm always at home, but like,
Yeah.
probably I faced it even during this time, right? Like, it's become so normalized for people like us that like we just sort of don't even remember it. But like every year I remember somebody saying something, and like, Toronto is home. Toronto is safe. Toronto is the place I always want to be, right? Like, Toronto is where I can be me. I lived for a year in New York doing my master's at Columbia, and like, it was an amazing place, and I love New York. but couldn't wait to get back to Toronto. Like it's this safe place where people are like, oh yeah, it's a dude with a turban, and that means nothing to me because our minister of defense wears a turban and another minister wears a turban, and like whatever, man. Like whereas in the States it was like I was being called from time to time Bin Laden or whatever, like on the
Right.
regs, and that was like 2017, man. Like that was like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
2016.
you got guys like Jagmeet Singh and Garothan that
Yeah,
are now spearheading and being political, you know, the faces of political parties. What happened in was it Indiana or no Indianapolis
yeah,
last week was so unfortunate, right? With the FedEx shooting that happened, and a few of the people that passed away were sick individuals. The level of racism happening in the U.S. is just unparalleled.
yeah.
Not just within our community, but like even Asians, for example. There's this whole Stop Asian Hate.
For sure, for sure. There's a huge amount of hate there, and they're such an ingrained part of American society, like such an ingrained part of American society. And to see that kind of like sort of racism and hatred, which we all knew was happening, but we all sort of assumed that it doesn't happen. But it's always happening. Like Asian people have always faced that. And then whether it's SARS or whether it's, H1N1 or now, like with COVID, everybody just sort of goes back to this like really tribalistic sense of thinking, which is really terrible. And they do really bad things to other people who
Yeah,
don't deserve it.
but it goes back to the system, right? Like that shooting that happened in Indianapolis. Like, had
Mm-hmm.
that been a brown person, it would have turned the headlines
Oh
would have been
yeah, for
different.
sure. We've all seen
Terrorist
that meme,
attack,
right? Like
Indianapolis, eight
of
dead.
we've all seen that meme, the Family Guy meme, where like he's holding up like a color palette, and like the lighter skinned you are, it's like it's like, oh, this like confused mentally ill individual, and the darker color palettes, you're like, oh, this is terrorist, right? Like
Yeah,
or
yeah.
whatever. Like of course it would have been a huge thing. Um,
And it's unfortunate that that's a reality.
yeah,
That's exactly what is happening, right?
yeah,
But JT, I want to shift gears a little bit.
sure.
Every podcast, I
Yeah,
do something called a speed round.
yeah. Let's do it.
It's a series of questions that I ask. Try to answer them as concisely as you possibly can.
Sure.
And it's just a random. It's totally random. You can choose to skip questions if you want.
Mhm.
Do you have a drink with you, or?
Not anymore.
Okay, okay, same. I just finished mine.
Yeah,
But usually, if you're in the studio, I would have been like, "Hey, take a chug every time you skip a question." But you ready?
I got you. Let's do it.
All right, all right. First question: what's the first concert you attended?
Ravi Shankar Alaraka.
Was it in Toronto?
Sitar. It was in Toronto. It was I grew up learning tabla, and so
Okay.
Alaraka, one of the greatest tabla players of all time, whose son is Zakir Hussain, now one of the greatest tabla players of all time, if not the greatest, and Ravi Shankar. Yeah, that was my first concert. It was wild. It
Awesome.
was
What year?
nuts to me.
What year?
Man, like I think I was maybe like 12 or 13, so I don't know, but like it was amazing. I went to the what is it called? The place that's just downtown, the concert hall, Roy Thompson Hall.
That.
Roy
Okay.
Thompson Hall. Yeah, it was at Roy Thompson Hall. It was wild for
Nice.
me.
Okay.
Yeah, it was great. I would say though, outside of that, the first major like amazing concert that I went to Festival d'été in Quebec City when I did my like J'explore, like where I learned French for 5 months, or sorry, for 5 weeks in Quebec City. Festival d'été. It was Kanye open air. He like performed for like 3 hours straight. It was wild.
Bro,
Yeah, it was
bro,
amazing.
Kanye is
In
um
2007.
2007.
Yeah.
Okay, this is before like the whole
Yeah, man. He was coming up. He
Kardashian
was yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. He
yeah,
was coming up, and he was wearing the polos. He was playing a
okay,
lot of the
okay.
beats that he
Co-
made for
College dropout.
Jay-Z. Yeah, he was like, "Here's another beat I made for my buddy. Here's another beat
Yeah,
I made."
yeah.
Like, and it was amazing. He was playing like H to the
That
Izzo and
that's
shit. It was great.
that's dope, man.
Yeah, yeah.
What's your favorite restaurant in Toronto?
Ooh, favorite restaurant in Toronto. For before COVID, I was really hot on this place that's just down the street from me called Bar
Mhm.
Piquette, which I think Grant Van Garmeren also has something to do with. So I
Okay.
like that. But I also like Le Swan, Jen Egg's spot. And honestly, for Indian food, like man, I like Banjara. Banjara is just up the street,
But
up near Christie
yeah,
Pitts. It's
yep, yep.
very, very good, cheap and
Can never
cheerful,
go wrong.
amazing
That's on
food.
Bloor, right? Bloor and Christie.
You got it, yeah. Yeah,
I've
yeah,
been there.
yeah.
What's your most used emoji?
Probably it's this one, man. It's sorry, I'm
It's
just it's the first class in Desi speak. It's the first it's the I don't know how do you describe that?
it's a okay for
It's
the
the
listeners
okay.
that are tuning.
It's exactly
It's
what
the
it is. It's
okay.
the okay, but it's like very brown. Like it's I find
Yeah,
that it's
you
like a
know,
big part of like it's my way of being like sounds good, man. Like
you remember
perfect.
what was it, Bad Boy Furniture? Was it? You
Yes.
never? Yeah,
Yes.
nobody.
Nobody. Yeah.
Um,
That's right.
read your last text message.
My last text. All right, let me look it up.
You don't have to, by the way. You can skip. But
All right, man. Like it's not exciting. My last text message said KK. All right, uh, let me read. Okay. This is the last text message somebody else sent to me. It's the one right. I'm literally following like the order that, and it says, yes, indeed, Big Jag Man. It makes for a nice overview of important hip hop history. So this is a buddy of mine, Chris. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, Christopher J. Williams. Keep an eye out for him. He's brilliant, and he also works at the Ontario Human Rights Commission. He is, someone who focuses heavily on anti-Black racism and those related issues, and he's done a bunch of work on that. He's already written a book. He's doing his PhD all about to be done that. He's going to be Dr. Christopher J. Williams pretty soon,
amazing.
and he and I often exchange hip hop recommendations. And he had basically told me, he's like, Nas Time is Illmatic is on Netflix. You need to watch this. I said, sounds good, man. I'm going to get on it. And he said, yes, indeed. Big
It's a
Jack.
documentary, right?
Yeah.
Nas documentary. I
Yeah.
saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta check that.
It's
Yeah.
really good.
On that note, you're on an island right now. You find an iPod. Now, unfortunately, that iPod only has one album. What album would it be?
Oh,
And this is
man.
the album that you would listen to for the rest of your life.
Okay. 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 Here's I grew up I grew up like obviously being from Scarborough. I grew up on heavy like gangster rap, hip hop. Like it was a big part of my life. But I also, because I played tabla, which is a classical Indian instrument, I was very into classical Indian musicology, and in particular a lot of Gurmat Sangeet. Like I'm talking some really old stuff. Like I like um, Shamsher Singh Zakhmi and Darshan Singh Zakhmi. These were some really old kirtaniyas, and kirtan, for whoever's listening, is sort of they're classical. It's a lot like the Sikh version of Sufi music, but Sikhism, sort of the scriptures are written specifically with ragas and musicology built into the scriptures. Like they're a part of the actual scriptures. So kirtaniyas are people who are able to understand that music and sing the scriptures within that way. And Sikh scriptures are just poetry. They're just pure mystical poetry, beautiful poetry. And Shamsher Singh Zakhmi and Darshan Singh, they just they ran my childhood, man. Like I used to listen to them like full, like I say albums, but they're recordings that were given to me by friends and family. And if I had to choose, I would do that. Um,
What about on
second,
hip hop side?
second
If
would
you had a
probably be hip hop. Like that would immediately next would be hip hop. Um, oh man, it would be tough. I would probably have to go with you know what, man? I love Black Thought, and I love the Roots. And as much as I love the greats of rap, like Black Thought is one of the
my
greats.
guy.
And like just the idea of like a bit more musicality, and like just Black Thought's brilliant. So I would say some album by the Roots, probably like I don't know. I don't know. I
I
would have
agree
a
with
hard
you. I
time
agree with
choosing,
you,
but
man.
like the Roots are amazing. Like
Yeah, I think that they fall in the caliber like Gangstar and Guru, and
yes.
like that type of lyricism and the way music was, and also rest in peace DMX. Like like I feel like we're at an age, and as we get older, our
Yeah.
childhood
Yeah.
music heroes are you're gonna hear them more and more in the news, and that's just the reality of us getting older,
Yeah,
right? But
but at least they become
like that,
classics, right? Like that's what we grow up with. At least them becoming classic. I just want to correct. Sorry, I kept saying Darshan Singh Zakhmi. There's Professor Darshan Singh, whom I also love, and Taram Singh Zakhmi. His name was Taram Singh Zakhmi, and Shamsher Singh Zakhmi was his younger brother. So that was a whole genre and area as well. But like, yeah, when it comes to hip hop, like I agree with you, man. Like I think about, I think about a lot of the people that I used to listen to growing up, whether it was like Most Def or whether it was like, a wild number of people. Like I can't even describe it. And I remember, man, I remember when we had to choose a poem to recite in
Okay,
elementary
yeah.
school. I chose Changes. I chose Changes, Tupac Changes.
You.
And like I was like reading this out. I was reading out this poem in like seventh grade or something like that, being like, this is the poem I chose amongst like all of my white classmates and like one black dude in the class. And like
Yeah.
that was it. That was what I chose. I was like, this is the poem I'm gonna do. Tupac was a poet. And like that was
Okay.
it. That was, I'm
Yeah,
like
yeah.
reading out Roughed Up Some Punk way back. Like that was a part of that whole
Those were the days, man. The haiku, similes, writing poetry,
yeah,
and stuff
yeah,
growing up.
yeah,
I mean, I've been a hip hop head all my life, and
yeah,
I still am.
yeah,
And I think about it yesterday. I was listening to, I just so one of the things that I do, and I think I started doing more in this pandemic is, I have those nights where I just put on my headphones
yeah.
and I'll just listen to an entire album without any interruption.
That's great.
Right. And
Yeah,
it's become a little bit of a ritual that I do once a week. And I was thinking about Kanye, and as much as the mainstream media and everybody's like, because of Kanye is this, Kanye is
yeah.
crazy, but man, that guy is a
He
genius.
is, he
And
is,
I
he is,
think we truly
he's a
don't
genius.
appreciate how much of a genius he is while he's alive today.
Yeah.
Because like I listened to one of his albums. Um, it was the one that he just released called the bipolar one. I hate being bipolar. What was it
Oh,
called?
wasn't it? Oh, I think I know it. It's actually one of my partner's favorite albums. I think it's like. By the way, for the Roots, the two albums that I love are "Things Falling Apart" and "How I Got Older." How I Got Over, rather.
How okay, okay. No, Kids
Yeah.
See Ghosts. That's what it was. Kids See
Yes, Kids See
Ghosts.
Ghosts. That's right. Yeah,
Kids
yeah,
See
yeah, yeah. I
Ghosts.
remember
Yeah.
that. Actually, I bought that.
But
I bought that in vinyl for my partner because she loved it so much. Kids See Ghosts. Yeah, it's a great album.
yeah, I'm a huge Outkast fan. Like I have Outkast both
Yes.
The Aquemini vinyl as well. And I think that, you know, long story short, hip hop always has a soft spot in my
Yeah.
heart, and it
Yeah.
always will.
Yeah.
Going back to our question. So, what's your happy place?
Oh man, my happy place. It's with friends and family, man. That's it. Anytime I get the ability. I mean, they're separate for me. Like I love my family, and there's a very happy space. It's usually during the holidays, like during Christmas. It's so rare that you get a chance for no reason just to hang out with your family and have no expectations from work and nothing else. And like that time when you can just hang out, talk about anything and everything. I remember 2 years ago, I watched Two Popes with my folks and like my family, and it was amazing. It was mind blowing. Every line we were like pausing it and being like, "What? That was crazy, that line. Like, what do you think this means?" And like talking about it. It's an awesome. If you haven't seen it, it's really, really great. Two
I
Popes.
haven't I haven't seen it. Two
Highly
Popes.
recommend it. Yeah, yeah,
Let me
yeah.
check.
Highly, highly, highly recommend it. And then like with friends who are like family. Like I can think of my friends from law school, and I can think of my friends who I made, even a few friends who I made even just after law school. But like, man, like when I'm with them, it's like I'm with family, and I just feel at peace with them, and it's just a great time. And apart from that, honestly, I love being alone as well. Like I love my partner and I love spending time with her. I also really enjoy being alone, and I don't know that a lot of people do, but I
I
really
think
like
it
it.
tested a lot of people, especially this pandemic. Like, segueing onto that now is like,
Yeah,
it tested a lot of people, like, being alone and being lonely and who really is okay.
yeah,
Because I'm sure it stirred up a lot of anxiety for a lot of people in terms of like, okay, I can't socialize, I can't go out, I'm stuck with myself. What do I do? And I feel like a lot of people, might agree with this, but a lot of there's a lot of silver linings out of this.
I think
A
so.
lot of reality checks.
Yeah, yeah.
Like the other day this week, Rogers was down. Not other day, was it
It was
yesterday? I
yesterday.
think
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yesterday.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Rogers is down. And I was like, yeah, every time I left the house, because I needed my Wi Fi to get in contact with everybody, I couldn't get in
That's
touch
it.
with
Yeah,
anybody.
you were done.
And
Yeah,
I'm like, fuck, can you imagine? Like, we're in a pandemic. Can you imagine not having any sort of service
that'd be
to
amazing.
connect with everybody around you?
Oh my god.
Like,
I'd kind
did
of
you see
love
that?
it. Like, let's not let
Yeah.
me. Look.
I,
I love the idea of being connected at all times. I really
right,
do.
right.
Like, I like that
Yeah.
ability. I like that a lot. But like being forced to not be connected, that's wild. Like that's That's
Yeah, and can you
amazing.
imagine, like, imagine this pandemic happening in like the early 90s,
Yeah.
where we didn't have the luxury of having the internet.
Yeah.
It's like, fuck,
It
like,
would probably be
yeah,
nothing. It would just be like, oh, well, I guess we'll just not watch TV. No, wait, you
yeah.
get to watch TV. It's a pandemic. I was thinking blackout. Remember when the blackout happened?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
that's what I was thinking of. Yeah, but if the pandemic happened in the 90s, yeah, I never really thought of it that way, like what it would be
Like,
like, you
I,
know.
I think like right now we're a little desensitized because like we're kind of normal, we're normalizing a little bit. Like this time last year, there was a big element of fear.
Yeah,
You know, everyone was scared. Everyone's like, we don't know what this is
yeah,
and
for
we don't
sure.
know what the outcome is going to be.
Yeah,
But now we kind of have a general idea, you know, of COVID in the sense of like, you know, like I feel like, you know, generally speaking, we know, you know, what it is and these variants are coming
for sure.
and it's there's a lot of fatigue, I think, with
Yeah.
us. We're kind of sick and tired. We want to get back to, you know, our normal routine of going out, going to work.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of blame now, like on the government. And one of the questions that I got today, and I wanted to ask you, and we
Yeah.
can keep it very high level, is, you know, if you were premier, JT,
Hmm.
what would you do today? What would you do to handle this pandemic? Like, what would your just like what would you do differently, essentially?
Well, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, like, as you know, given the work I do, I try to stay somewhat apolitical. But you know, if it comes to the pandemic, one of the things that I know from the work that I do at the Human Rights Commission, one of the things that I know is that, like, you know, vulnerable and marginalized communities are A, affected the most by this, and B, often receive the least sort of services. And so, you know, whether it comes to, you know, what if we're thinking about, like, you know, what would we do in terms of lockdown and these sorts of things, I think number one probably would have been, you know, institute paid leave and, like, keep the lockdown. It's okay if you have it, we have paid leave, and do a real lockdown, make sure that everybody has the supplies they need. If you look at a place like you know, New Zealand and these other places, even Australia, they implemented lockdowns, but they made sure that the people, but they were very strict lockdowns, and they were able to get rid of a lot of the issues. And there's going to be a bunch of people saying, like, you know, those are islands, those are other situations, and there's that. But if you do it right and you make sure that you provide, if you do a strict lockdown and you make sure that you provide the necessaries of life, and you make sure that people are not starving and people feel safe and secure during the lockdown, everyone feels safe and secure during the lockdown, to the extent possible, you're going to be able to get a better handle on this. Certainly, if we have the social supports that we need, we're going to be able to do that. Without that, we're not going to be able to, and we're going to do sort of these half lockdowns that we've been doing. The other part is when it comes to vaccines, like, and this whole time, the other big thing I would be doing is making sure that I ensure that there's data collection on all of this, so that we understand, we're able to study this afterward, and we're able to understand exactly which communities were hit hardest, the worst, why, and, like, we're able to engage with that. I certainly wouldn't have cut public health budgets, which were cut just before this happened. And in addition to that, when it comes to vaccines, I think that it's pretty clear that, you know, I understand that the government was trying to engage with, you know, they were trying to engage with those who were most vulnerable in church first, which makes, like, it's clear that there are communities who have to go to work on a regular basis
Right, right,
and
yeah.
who are, you know, essential workers, and, you know, they haven't gotten, like, look at Brampton, we're hitting a 25% infection rate. Like, that's nuts.
That's
How is it that there
insane.
hasn't been more there? How is that possible? How is that humanly? Same thing in Scarborough,
Yeah,
right? Like, why isn't there more attention being paid there? Like,
yeah.
I think that that just, these are questions that
It's
just need answers, right? And I think that those would be things that I would be paying a lot more attention to if I could.
mhm. Yeah, I think you nailed it, man. I think you know it's a thought that's been going on, and it's been a big conversation in my household. You know, my mom, for example, she works. You know, I'm sure a lot of people in the marginalized communities, for example, or in the minority groups, they're working in packaging manufacturing, like
Yeah,
or they're considered
absolutely.
essential, but they're non-essential manufacturing,
Yeah, yeah,
and they have to go to work because they're considered manufacturing.
yeah,
I'm not going to name her company, but I'll give you an example. You know, they are in the packaging business of like things that are like toiletry items
yeah,
and whatnot.
yeah,
And it's absolutely, like, in my opinion, not necessary. And I
yeah,
remember calling Health Canada when the pandemic first happened. I was like, you know, this is a warehouse, and this is just one sample, for example, where there's hundreds of people on a shift,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and they have to go to work.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem, right? Because
Yeah.
they don't have another, like, people in those communities don't really have an option because that's their livelihood. So
Yeah.
paid sick leave is definitely important, but I do think that
Hmm.
there needs to be. I haven't really seen much conversation around this, the manufacturing sector, and them deemed essential when really they're non-essential and they should be staying at home.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's enough research and data that's being presented that's really focused in those areas.
For
And
sure.
instead you have restaurants and small businesses in Toronto that are kind of put on the stake and saying, well, you need to shut down,
Yeah.
that's going to be the solution, but
Yeah.
there's no fucking proof behind that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's yeah, it's a shit storm, man. Are you open to getting any vaccine
It's
available,
wild.
or?
It's wild for sure. Try not to get J&J, Johnson and Johnson. There seem to be a lot of issues with that. But I mean, I'd get AstraZeneca in a heartbeat. Like,
Yeah,
if they
yeah,
opened
I'm
it
ready,
up.
man.
Yeah,
I've been checking online every day, and I'm like, I'm all for it. My girl got Pfizer yesterday,
that's great. That's great. Good.
so she got lucky. She lucked out. So I'm just trying to wait my turn and see when that happens.
That's
But
it. Like as soon as you can do it, right? Like I mean, that's the goal for sure.
yeah, but JT, it's been amazing to have you on the
Yeah, it's been
podcast,
great,
man.
man.
As we kind of wind down a little bit, I want
Yeah,
to kind of ask one question.
sure.
There's still a lot of uncertainty, and I know that you shared a lot of positivity and what you've been doing to keep busy. But for the people out there that are struggling to kind of, keep their sanity and keep positive and are getting frustrated with the situation that we're in, what's your advice to the people listening?
Wow.
Like, what would be your best number one tip or advice to stay positive?
Uh, it's a big one. You know, I don't I don't know that it's always going to work for all people. I think that that's important to acknowledge from the very beginning. I mean, like people are in different situations, right? They have family situations, or they have work situations, or it is what it is, right? Like, I think, the best thing that someone can do is acknowledge that they're in a tough place and that things aren't going great for them. And if there's a possibility to ask or seek help from someone, and I don't mean that like, go out and necessarily seek something from someone professional. Like if you have that ability, certainly do that. But if you're able to say to someone, whether it's your partner or whether it's, a family member, like, look, I'm having a bit of a rough go of it. Do you think you could take on these responsibilities while I take a bit of a break or something for a time period? And if that's what helps you maintain your sanity, then that definitely try to do something like that. Um, and maybe just don't be so hard on yourself.
Yeah, compassion is huge.
Yeah,
Self-compassion is good.
self-compassion, a bit of that, I think would probably be great. Life can be really, really tough reading a lot of the bad news. And I think like if you have the ability to maybe just like do stuff that makes you happy for a short period of time, or even for longer, if you do, for sure, do it for a longer period of time. But if you have the ability to do it for a short period of time, definitely take advantage of that and do it. You certainly deserve it. Everybody deserves it, especially at this time. It's not an easy thing to deal with, this pandemic, and like, not just this, but like the white supremacy, the like the general sort of like, we had 4 years of Trump, man. That was
Yeah,
tough.
yeah.
That was not
We had that
easy.
guy. We had that guy right there.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I see him in your background. Like that was not easy. That was a rough time, and that was literally the growth of white supremacy that took place during that time was nuts. You know, and people are getting shot on a very regular basis in the States and being killed on a very regular basis in the States, and I'm sure elsewhere as well. There's a rise of Hindutva in India, where like right wing fascism, Hindu fascism, is and government sponsored, is killing thousands of people. And like, reading all that news and perhaps being connected to it and in various ways, it can be very stressful. And so like, taking a bit of time to take it easy and not being so hard on yourself is probably pretty helpful. If you
That's
can,
great.
if you're
If you
privileged enough
can,
to be
yeah.
able to. Yeah.
I think that's huge, and we can, the farmers protest. I feel like we can do it a completely different
Yeah,
podcast on
yeah,
that.
for
But
sure.
I think that we're not alone. Tough times don't last forever, and I think
Yeah.
when you look back at your life, this period of time is just going to be a small blimp
Yeah.
of what's ahead. And I think that's what we would constantly need to remind each other and remind ourselves, that, you know, there's life after this. And, you know, we are a resilient people, a resilient species. You know, humans have done so much to advance to where we are today. I can only imagine what's going to happen. You know, Elon is probably going to take over the fucking world, but you know, there's so much uncertainty, but at the same time, there's so much to look forward to. And you know, JT, I hope that we can get together in person next time, and I'd love to do a podcast again.
I look forward to
in
it.
The studio. You know, maybe on the east side, a little Scarborough connection.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
Any shout outs?
We'll get some luckies. And we'll sit down and hash it out. No, it'd be great, man. Like, it was a great time. Thanks so much for having me. It was really fun talking to you. Honestly, it was just like fun hanging out and catching up. It's been a little while.
It's crazy. Time flies. I know it's been like 90 minutes. I feel like we just started talking.
You're gonna have to edit this down. What I recommend is that you cut out the beginning part when I didn't know that I was being recorded. Cut it down.